Okay, welcome everybody. So nice to see faces I know and love, and people in the room. We are here at the Eros Monastery. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin, and the topic of today's talk is fear and loathing of the esoteric. I'll try and keep this to about 40 minutes and then have some time for questions. And we will do a part 2 of this talk. So yeah, we're going to take our time and really sink into the topic, because that is what it is for, and that is how this realm works. You sink into it. So yeah, welcome again. And I'm going to start with a couple of sort of introductory remarks. One is that I am a highly, highly unlikely candidate to be doing a talk about the esoteric. There were no crystals in my house. There were no healing crystals of any kind. There were no Palo Santo sticks. I didn't know what a Palo Santo stick was until I was 35. The Akashic records were not on the shelves anywhere of my mind or the bookshelf. And my book of spells was the Economist magazine, which on a good week I would read cover to cover, do the whole thing, and that was where I got my knowledge. I was a serious person, and so, you know, this is not really something I expected to be talking about as I was growing up. The second thing to say is Kapil's telling me to stop hiding. That's my eternal friend Kapil, spirit brother. Yeah, the second thing I'll say is that I am an attorney for One Taste, and part of my experience with this topic is colored by my experiences as an attorney, both with One Taste and in the work that I did before, and just how these things operate in the world and the kind of dynamics at play, and what I've observed from like over 20 years of legal practice. But I'm speaking here in my personal capacity. I'm not speaking for One Taste. I'm not speaking for the Institute of Om, which runs the Eros platform. Okay, so I'll say that too. And so when I came to One Taste and orgasmic meditation, I didn't come for the esoteric. That was not on my to-do list or my desires list or my wish list. What I came for was to get better with the opposite sex. Or as a friend put it when I told her that, said, oh, so you want to get good with the bitches. And this was a time back in 2014 when hip hop was ascendant, and you know, it was cool to kind of talk in that way. Everyone was just like letting it out. And times now are a little more puritanical, and we still love them. We love our Puritans. But that was kind of how we spoke, and that was kind of what I wanted. And as I went through my journey with One Taste and orgasmic meditation, I learned that there were far deeper levels of things available and things that I wanted. But basically, you start where you start, and that's where I started. And as far as the esoteric went, like, I didn't really think it had a lot to offer people. You know, I just thought it was people basically wasting their time. You know, like whatever it was, Tai Chi, Qigong, Tarot cards, crystal healings, intuitive messages from the Ascended Masters. I really thought you're mostly wasting your time. You're primarily in denial, and you're just not a serious person. But if you're attractive, I will feign interest to try and impress you. I can do that. I can do that for a good half an hour. But as far as like genuinely thinking there was something in it for me in this topic, no way, Jose. So, okay, what is the esoteric? I had to go and look it up. And I'm going to talk about the esoteric, the mystical, and the spiritual, and I'm going to put them more or less in the same bucket. And esoteric comes from the Greek word esoterikos, which means the inner circle. And it generally is a form of knowledge requiring special interest, training, and aptitude. And, the mystical is sort of, I didn't get a definition of it, but it's sort of accessing a state beyond what you can see in the everyday world. In fact, the word occult means hidden. And so like a magnet has a property where it draws things in. You cannot see it or repels. You don't see it, but that is hidden. And so that is like an occult property. And this is where the fear and loathing really begins, because it's this hidden thing, it's this unknown thing, it requires special knowledge. And things like that, as a lawyer, I can tell you, are prone to abuse. Anytime somebody has a form of control over some resource or asset, that can be used in ways to harm or benefit others. But it's definitely something that people start paying very close attention to, especially when they think that there's some kind of trickery or fraud going on. So that kind of, just the words themselves kind of give you a clue as to all the troubles that will unfold from there. Okay, and so as I'm going through my one taste journey, it's around 2013. I'm learning the practice of orgasmic meditation. I'm doing a few weekend courses and classes. I'm taking my time. I'm checking it out. And I begin to learn that there's this area of esoteric interest in the company. Just one of many. Okay, and now I'm going to hit you with another caveat, which is, there was interest in the esoteric within One Taste, but it was one of, we actually counted them at some point, and it was one of something like 67 or 87, I can't remember the exact number, but a hell of a lot of fields of interest that One Taste taught about, brought in outside teachers about, had us learn about. And that's because the company and the practice itself and the movement that surrounds it is driven by a feminine ethos. And the feminine ethos is, instead of one massive spotlight that you shine on things to like illuminate everything about them, it's lots and lots of tiny little lights to illuminate different facets of things and get the full complexity and richness of everything, which is how women operate. So, it's a good approach if that's what you're interested in, which I was. So when I'm going to be talking a lot about the esoteric and the mystical and the spiritual and stuff, but it's just one slice of the pie. And if you read the media accounts, they blow it up like this and actually ignore everything else. Like, for example, we did a whole session of months and months of training on boundaries and how do you have boundaries. And our source book for that, our workbook for that, was a brilliant book, which I highly recommend, called Boundaries. I can't remember its full title. It's by Dr. John Townsend and Dr. Henry Cloud. It's a fantastic book, and it's really based on very traditional Christian principles. I mean, they literally teach using Bible stories, and it was profoundly useful for me and it actually helped me reconcile with Christianity, which I have a lot of love and respect for as a tradition, as an access to the mystical, as an access to knowledge, which I didn't from my background of thinking that's just, not for me, basically. So that is something we will talk about for another day, but today we are talking about the esoteric and the mystical. So how did I get into an interest in this field, and how did I make the turn from realizing, wow, there's really, really something powerful and true that will make a difference, like a practical, pragmatic, everyday difference in my life. And what happened was that I went off to New York. I was living in London at the time, and I did a 5-day course that One Taste was offering called Mastery. And it was in the West Village in New York, in this beautiful photography studio overlooking the Hudson River. It was just a phenomenal, fantastic building. And we spent 5 days in this mastery class. And part of the teaching and the topics of that began to get into these esoteric fields. You know, the Kabbalah, the Tarot, which is based on the Kabbalah. Alchemy. There's a brilliant book by Catherine McCune called On Becoming an Alchemist. Thank you, Leah. Which was kind of a source book for that. And there was a way that, and Nicole Daedone was teaching this class, and there was a way that she spoke about that the second she spoke about it, I just knew there was something like absolutely true and beautiful and powerful here, and I wanted to explore it, and I wanted to know about it in a way that I hadn't felt that level of desire many times in my life. It really, really touched me. And she did 2 beautiful things, which are actually a demonstration of these esoteric principles in practice. One is she really, from her own sort of deep practice and study of this, really let you feel how powerful it was. So you could just feel it in the room. You could just feel there was something beautiful and powerful there. And then she explained it in a way that it made complete sense to me. It was as if she had written an Economist in the article about how this operated. And if we had all day, I would love to go into hours and hours of how it does operate, but we're not going to do that right now. I'm going to restrain myself and hold myself back, or other people will, and just keep going, okay? But one thing I will, like, just to give you one little taste and a little example, we did this alchemical meditation and ritual where you're just sitting in your seat and you imagined the best thing that had ever happened to you, the moment that you were most alive, most happy, most joyous. And then you imagined the worst, deepest, darkest moment in your life. And then you combined those and it became something else. And then you spread that out into the world, and then you drew it back in. You did all these kind of meditations, which you'll find analogs of in Tibetan Buddhism and in other traditions, which Tibetan Buddhism is also kind of alchemical. And we did that. It was so powerful for me because the best experience and the worst experience involved the same person. And the one was falling in love with that person, and the other was that person leaving my apartment, throwing coffee mugs past my head, and driving away, never ever to be seen again. And the incredible months of heartbreak that followed that. And so it really was a very powerful way for me to like integrate something deeply emotional into what was a pretty rigid man's body at that point. So made a huge difference for me. So yeah, and I was initiated into this form of knowledge by somebody who had been before, and that's kind of the way this path works. You get initiated into it by someone, and so I felt at that point like I was some kind of initiate into something mystical and magical, where I didn't have to sign my life away or sign any contracts. It was just like, I want to explore this. I'm going to. And I had one experience previously in my life that had touched this same kind of feeling, which was I was living in South Africa. I was going through law school, and there was a spiritualist teacher who they brought out, and he was from, I think, Uganda. And this was like way out for me. And the auditorium was pretty packed. I was like, where did they find all these people in Johannesburg? You know, it's like there's golf courses and tennis courts, and you know, and there's a beautiful, rich African tradition of sangomas and stuff, but this was full of like honkies like me, basically. And I was like, wow, okay. And he basically did this kind of reading of the room where he went around and sort of, never having met any of these people before in his life, just did these deep, rich readings about their family and their past and their background. And you know, I'm kind of watching this, kind of impressed, but slightly also like, yeah, like what's the trick here? What's the catch? What's the thing? But the things that he said to me personally and to my ex-girlfriend who was sitting next to me, who I was still very good friends with, I think about them on a weekly basis. They were so true, and they were so powerful, and they've been a compass and a guide for my life ever since. And so I had that one experience that I knew to be true. But this was sort of more a way where I could actually access it and study it. And the next thing that we did a couple of months after that course was the now notorious Magic School. And Magic School took place in late July, early August in Asilomar in Monterey in California. I mean, even the names are like magical. This is also the place where the principles for the development of AI were first developed. They're called the AI principles. And so that's kind of cool because we love AI and we love those kinds of things. And it's a beautiful place designed by a woman. And we all went off there, and there were about, 130 of us or so in this course. 40 of us came from London. 40 people from London got on a plane, flew to California, took a bus down the coast to Monterey, and joined this course. It was just the biggest party, the biggest celebration. And the prescribed reading for that book, that course, was a book called Moon Magic. And Moon Magic is by an author Dion Fortune, who was an occultist and a ritualist in London, sort of early 20th century. And so I bought this book, I started reading it, and I was really thrilled because it's written like a novel, and like quite an entertaining novel. And the novel was set slap bang in the middle of where I was living. So I was living at that time. It was a very exciting time in my life in general. You know, I'd given up my career as a lawyer, and I was kind of not sure what I was going to do next with my life. I was living with other home practitioners, and it was a really sort of new, exciting time in my life where I finally had the courage to be like, I'm going to set out on a new path. Hey presto, guess what? I'm still a lawyer. I still work with the same law firm that I left. I'm now a client instead of the lawyer there. And that is what magic and the esoteric will do for you as well. It can reconcile all parts of you and bring it all back home. But so I was reading this book, and the action was taking place like literally on the streets I would walk every day. And it takes place in a beautiful part of London, which is Westminster. These beautiful Gothic Parliament buildings are there. There's the cobbled streets. There's St. James's Palace with the ducks and the swans. There's Westminster Cathedral. I mean, fantastic. The old West End and these like magical old theaters. It really is like a magical place. And the two, got to watch my time here because we're gonna end this at 40 minutes. So that's gonna happen, folks. Just because we're in the magical, mystical, esoteric doesn't mean we just completely take the gloves off on the time, okay? So we had, so the two characters in this book are Dr. Rupert Malcolm, and I had to figure out her name this morning, which our good friends here helped us with, Lilith LaFay Morgan. And Dr. Rupert Malcolm was basically me, with like a combination of me and my dad. He's this like, I mean, I'm not ginger haired, but if I had hair, it would kind of be ginger-ish. My dad is ginger haired. He's ginger haired, he's bad tempered, he's wiry, he's a workaholic, and he's very good at what he does, and he cares a lot about what he does, but he's kind of like a burnt out, grumpy terror to be around. So that was like me to a T, except that I had, you know, kind of quit my job and was now floating around, basically because I couldn't keep going anymore. But Dr. Rupert Malcolm was still trudging away and doing his thing. But the same thing happens to him as what happens to me, is that he gets drawn into the feminine, and into the unknown, and into the esoteric, and into the mystical. And he has this dream about this woman in a cape who is Lilith LaFay Morgan, which is thinly disguised for Dion Fortune herself. And he first dreams her, and then he actually sees her on the street one night, and he starts following her. Now, because he's a married man, he's got places to do, he's got things to do. He shouldn't be, you know, following women on the streets and whatnot. But he's just drawn, and he can't stop himself, and he feels humiliated, and he feels embarrassed that he's been drawn into this person. And you know, and I was, pardon the pun, spellbound by all of this as I'm reading it. So, and I love the description of the feminine and of her that they have in there, because she's this like warm, enveloping force that draws him in, and his kind of power and his strength and stuff, but brings order and brings hydration to this like dried out man, and kind of through their interactions, which is kind of like a form. This part I need to read again, but it's like a kind of they did this form of ritual, esoteric, possibly erotic, although I couldn't quite figure it out, yoga together, which was not like, oh baby, you know, it was like sort of uncomfortable and rigorous and challenging, but also very beautiful. And so that was Moon Magic, and I read that book, and really we won't know what magic school was and how it worked, but it was basically 5 days of the experience of that, of whether you were man or woman, or however you identified gender-wise, to bring these two polarities within us, and you know, find ways to unite them and bring out the softness and the strength, and for the feminine to like learn to draw in, stand erect, and bring order to the world. And so that's kind of what we were doing. So, you know, so this was deeply, deeply moving for me. It was deeply beautiful. And, you know, I loved the course. And so I was really, really pissed off when it became in 2018, when various articles were written, a Bloomberg article about One Taste, and later a podcast in late 2020 from the BBC. I love the BBC. I used to I was like stalking the BBC like Rupert Malcolm stalked Lilith Faye Lamorgan, because I was walk around there and I'd be like, wow, it's so beautiful. Like, it was the first broadcast. It was founded in 1922. They did all these beautiful things. They did Doctor Who. Like, I watched all these beautiful documentaries, and then to see them take magic school and a few people's experiences, everyone's entitled to their experience, however it was for you is how it was for you, and turn it into something so like seedy and tawdry and gross. And, you know, I was just kind of upset by it for a long time. But also just, you know, like part of these realms is just to learn to see reality as it is, and to learn to understand these things. And so I was also like deeply drawn to try and understand, like, how does this happen? You know, and what is going on here? And why is there such fear and loathing which gives people opportunity to financially take advantage of that, to get, clicks and advertising and fame and all of those good things that, it's fine for people to want. I'm just not thrilled about the mechanisms they're using to get there. So I'm going to just talk about one of these, and then we'll do the other three in part 2 of the series, which I hope you'll join me and bring your friends to. So the first one, and I owe a lot to Rhys Jones on helping me understand this in a different context, but I was like, wow, it really applies here. And the first thing is the notion of conservators and adapters. And this kind of gives you insight into the eternal nature of this cultural friction. Like, we've never not have it, from the Salem witch trials to Lenny Bruce and his obscenity trials, to Ginsburg and Howell, all of that. We've never not had this. And the thing I've learned is you can never not have that, because they are two poles. Neither of them is going to go away. It's learning how to interact. It's like, I can never expect my mother to be like me, like it's a recipe for pain. So what is a conservator? Conservator, and I'm going to butcher this, like Rhys is a evolutionary biologist or biophysicist or something, and I am not. So, but I'm going to give it a shot here, and I think you'll get the basic idea. So, conservator is a DNA sequence that's remained unchanged over long periods of evolutionary time, and they're often essential to biological functions. And so, if they change, the organism dies. And so, there's a strong, strong incentive for them to never, ever change, no matter what. They're just under a lot of pressure to stay the same through eons and eternity. And then you get your adapters. And your adapters are sequences of DNA that have evolved to take on new functions or adapt to changing environments. Okay, so this is an example he gave me, and I'm probably going to butcher it again, and there's nuances in here I get. But basically, in the middle of the ocean, you get a lot of life that's stable and consistent, and it doesn't change over time because the conditions don't change. The temperature of the ocean is much the same. The depth at which they live is the same. There's not much going on. There's not much change. And so for miles and miles of the ocean, it's just conservators all the way, effectively. But then at the seashore, when the conditions change all the time, which is what we're very much having a seashore time in our in our lives right now, of constant change. It's hot, it's cold, it's wet, it's dry, it's all happening over there. So those sequences are designed to adapt quite quickly. And so you see at the ocean floor this massive diversity of life there. But you actually need both. And so within institutions, within people, within each of us, you have your conservative part that wants to keep things the same and keep things safe and keep things consistent and keep things steady. And then you have your adapter that wants to go into the unknown and find out new things and find better ways of doing things and make tremendous, horrific mistakes. And both are absolutely essential. And Alan Watts did an absolutely brilliant talk on this at some point where, he talked about, he was writing at the time of the sort of cultural social upheavals and the sexual revolution of the 60s. And he basically said, look, it's an infinite play. It's an infinite game between these two sides. Like, one couldn't exist without the other, and they would lose all richness and complexity and the ability to grow and evolve together if you didn't have the finger wagging, Bible thumping, let's go and arrest these dirty poets, and then the poets revolutionizing and making dirty homosexual poetry and reading it out at universities. And if you didn't have both of those things, the whole display of life would go away. But in the moment when it's happening to you and you're stuck in some terrible case against the British Broadcasting Corporation for years and years at tremendous expense. It can get very serious very fast. And so, but that really helped me to understand why these things are kind of always at odds and why they'll always be in tension. So I think that's a good place to leave it for now. And if people have questions, I'm happy to take a couple of questions, and we'll take a few questions, and then we'll wrap up and have you go along on your way. Hisham.
Oh, thanks. That was awesome, Kevin. Love hearing that. You know, and especially as a lawyer, having that, you know, kind of that coming from that world and the esoteric world, like, you know, what helped you kind of integrate both, where it's like, you know, you see many people either go one way and then just like leave the other one and, you know, make that one bad, or, you know, stay in one and just never go into another. What had you kind of really integrate both?
I think I'm kind of an adapter by DNA sequence, you know, kind of, even in law. But I think I have a good amount of both. And so even in the law, I was always somehow doing the next new thing that no one had figured out or nobody understood, or be like, what is that? Is there even an area of law around that? And I would like find those and gather them out. So I was kind of like hardwired to do that. And I would say, having explored both realms a lot, like law and sort of the more, you know, spiritual realms, you get your conservators and your adapters in both. And, you know, don't be fooled by appearances. The woo-woo person can be way more rigid than the law, the corporate button-down lawyer. Like, some of those people are like wild inside. They have like huge energy, huge creativity, and they just like deeply channel it into these things. So I think, you know, I think the sort of massive display of the uniqueness, like, don't get caught up on the form, I think is what I've learned. Like, quality is quality wherever you go, and people's essences are the same wherever they go.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hi, I have a question. So my question is like, probably one I've wanted to ask you for a while, is kind of like, how do you keep your head up in all of this legal stuff that, like, to me sounds like to me personally sounds like a nightmare of like paperwork and legislation, red tape. Like, how do you be like, there's like, remember the feminine and be like, no, this is the truth. I know the truth. This is fucking paperwork. Like, it's just like, how do you do it?
Well, I'll say I was walking down to the garden the other day, and I found it completely overwhelming. Like I wanted to help, but I just didn't know where the hell to start. And it's like so big, and there's so much going on there, and there's the seedlings and the thing, and when do you plant them, and is the compost too wet or too dry and stuff. And so I think you understand that very well in different realms. Like, how do you actually not get like, oh God, I have to water these fucking plants. And like, sometimes you just don't. You just go into months and months of misery and resentment and thinking that, you know, life is a terrible toil. But there's something that keeps you inside of the beauty of the order that you're creating. And I think that's it. And then, you know, like, as you develop mastery and skill, it also, you know, I remember going to a lawyer and being like, she was actually a second cousin of mine at the law firm I started, and being like, this is so hard. Like, I want to quit. Like, when does it get easier? And she just looked me dead in the eyes and said, it doesn't. And that was both very horrible and very helpful, because it doesn't. It really doesn't. It's just, but I mean, it also does. Like, at some point you know, it becomes like, but this takes a time. Like, you know, you take one step and you move 10 instead of taking 10 steps and you move 1.
Thank you. I also want to say I'm really glad I didn't know this was going to be a series, and I'm really glad that it is a series, because I feel like this is like a teaser, and I feel like you introduced this really cool principle of like, you need one ballast to have the other one in existence. So I'm just excited. So thank you.
Me too. Me too.
If anyone online has a question, feel free to raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you.
Hi, Kevin. It's great. I see you, implementing the moon magic. It's like it's a genius. I can see you now differently, it's just, especially the moment when he was, what's his name? I forgot.
Rupert Malcolm.
Yeah, and he was following this priestess, and I could totally feel like he was drawn to feminine, and he didn't know why he is following her, but found himself in London, right, and like this in the dark, following this woman. But can you tell me like specific feminine side you discovered about yourself, something like that? In light of the law.
Feeling my feminine activated right now. Thanks. Feminine side I've discovered. I guess, well, I'm like tricky in the way that the feminine is. Like I don't ask for what I want directly, and I have these like tremendous, powerful like yearnings and longings, but a hell of a hard time getting it out of my mouth. So that's that's one very feminine aspect of myself I've discovered. I think, also like this beautiful, deep, like soft heart that's underneath everything that kind of will keep me going through the night or 3 a.m. or at all hours. And I think that is a feminine quality too. Thanks for the question. Appreciate that. I think we've got Austin. Sorry, I don't want to take over from anyone.
Hi, Kevin. I really appreciated, even from the written description, the use of the phrase fear and loathing. I was just like, oh, that's it. Like there's a way I can feel personally on kind of on behalf of other people, like overwhelmed by the energy that comes at subjects like this sometimes, especially like kind of eros. And somehow you describing it as fear and loathing and using those words in the talk had it kind of easier to wrap my mind around, or maybe to not kind of like run from it or be able to face it in the same way. And I just wondered if in the next 30 seconds you have a kind of sense of like what happens, like, why does it come with such intensity, and then what do we have to do to kind of counterbalance that and stay on our feet in the face of that kind of energy? Maybe that's
it's really hard. It's really hard. I think of two things with this. Like one is there's this brilliant book called which a lot of my inspiration for that came from this book, and I think it's called After the Ball: How America Will Get Over Its Fear and Hatred of Gays in the 1990s, or something. A long title. But the book is really about the struggles that the gay and the LGBTQ community went through, and just the horrific prejudice, like just astonishing prejudice that they faced, but then how they basically decoded it in a way that they could work with it. And it was like every single stereotype they had stats and facts and things of how are we going to break this one, like the idea that if you were gay, you lured people into becoming gay, and that was what gay people did, as if it was like this, as if they were all witch sorcerers, making people gay, and sort of like, okay, well that's a dumb, superstitious prejudice, which was widely accepted. It was just the way it was, but they didn't get caught up in the emotion of it. They were just like, what's our strategy? Like, where are we going to advertise? Who are we going to speak to? Like, which straight groups are we going to work with? Like, and they began to get their message across, and did very strategic things, like made it uncool and embarrassing to be gay, like made it more humiliating and embarrassing to hate on gay people than the fear. They just brought in a greater fear than the fear of this gay person turning my children gay, or whatever the sort of prejudicial fear was. Oh, and the second thing, which I'll say very briefly, which I've forgotten. So we'll do it in part 2.
Thank you. Look forward to it.
Next, we'll go to Austin.
Hey, Kev. I this is probably more of a reflection, but I loved how you set. It was like a kind of depth of cinema that you kind of you brought to the topic, which just felt right. It was like a it had a certain like boom to your presentation, and I think the thing that I found the most interesting was just that you can. I mean, I know there's parts of me that that are still looking for that integration into the esoteric, and I'd love to hear more about that, and how those kinds of things end up working themselves all the way to full expression.
Thanks, Horst. Yeah, part 2, 3, and 4. We're gonna get into it.
Amazing.
I mean, I will say, with you particularly, you and I have had a long journey together as friends and as colleagues, and we've gone through sort of crazy experiences, and so I think we have a lot of practice, because it's easy when you're in war to make the soldier next to you the enemy, and like one of the practices of alchemy is to get all that stuff straight within yourself as you're going through a time of kind of battle and struggle, so that you can learn to communicate with your friends. And so, I think in particular with you, I've learned how to be more like open-hearted and generous and understanding, and not so fixed on my own way of doing things, and learn to get out of these little stuck spots in ways that actually are kind of magical. So thanks for toiling with me in the trenches.
Next, we'll have Kara Joy.
Hi, Kev. This is really beautiful. I love it so much. And the technical terms, there's the conservators, and then what was the other word?
The adapters.
The adapters. So something that I didn't know the biological law about these DNA strands, and somehow it isn't really a question. Well, I just asked my question, but what I wanted to say was, this actually just gave me a lot of healing around my relationship with my parents, because they are conservators and I am an adapter. And so understanding this, like, there's always been this idea of somehow I'm supposed to change them to be more like me, or they're supposed to change me to be more like them. And this just gave me a lot of peace around, like, no, actually, it's not supposed to change. It's supposed to be like this, and that's okay.
Amen, sister.
Thank you. Really made me cry in a good way.
Oh,
Thanks, Karen. Next, we'll go to Kapil.
Hey, Kevin. Can you hear me okay?
yeah.
Well, first of all, I think it's more of a reflection. First of all, it's really great to see the inner workings of Kevin and the inner world. That was amazing to see. And I think what Kara Joy was saying, I think similar to that, the whole idea of the conservator and the adapters, it definitely healed something in me as well. I think, unlike you, I've always ran away from the corporate world ever since I left. So it's great to see, and inspiring to see you back in the legal world and be able to integrate the two parts. And I think I can definitely also see both the conservator part and the adapter part in me, and where it's not really integrated yet. So really grateful for that. I'm excited and looking forward to the next talk. And I was, when you were talking about this thing, I had this also. I was reading a book called The History of Protest in over the last 1,000 years, and there's a similar sort of idea in there, which talks about how different parties interact in our society, and how protest is such an important part, which is what I think the adapters play.
Yeah, and I think it's. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And I do think it's really important to take the time you need to do that integration. Like when it's done on its own schedule and it isn't rushed and demanded to be something that it isn't. You know, like sometimes going slow means when you go, you really go, and you know, so that people with a lot of like kind of almost planetary gravitational pull, like it can take forever. You know, it's like almost like a planet that takes a long time to get around the sun, but it's doing its thing, and it's like a depth of work that, you know, other little planets that are zipping around and maybe look awesome doing it, like just can't do. And so it, you know, it takes its time, and you know, from everything I can see over there, you're doing a beautiful, true and honest job with it.
Thanks for the compliment.
All right, unless there are any burners, yeah, I look forward to our next one. We'll get it on the schedule. I'll speak to the boss lady, Amanda, and we'll send out. I think we can send out an email to everyone who is on it, and we'll also put some ads and things about it out. And then you know, there are tons of other cool things coming up in the world of Eros and on the Eros platform. You know, we're all here at the Land Monastery and practicing every morning, and we're doing, you know, all kinds of practices from orgasmic meditation to yoga, just beautiful yoga sessions, meditation, and you get a chance to really sink in the redwoods into who you are and what you want, and how to combine all parts of yourself, and work with these things on their own schedule in a supportive environment. We've got amazing books coming out through Soulmaker Press. I mean, there's about 1,000 things that I could highly recommend, but I'll leave it at those two. Thanks everyone for joining. I had an absolute blast doing this, and thank you all for coming, and it was a ton of fun.